A Tale of Two Stands is definitely one of the most interesting episodes in the entirety of Gravity Falls, as it exists solely to provide answers in a show that's all about asking questions. Questions like, who is the author? What's the deal with Stan and his portal? Why do the journals have six-fingered hands on them? Why is Seuss so gopher-like? All these questions and more are brought to a close in this long-awaited entry in the series. And I was really excited for it when it came out, but after watching it, pondering it, and looking at it from every angle, one question kept bothering me. How old is Stan Pines actually? His age is normally portrayed as that of an out-of-shape old man, yet he's somehow still fit enough to fight back zombies, ride a pterodactyl and punch it in the head, and even escape government questioning. So something tells me he may not be all that old and weak after all. Yeah, I know, Stan Pines is not what he seems and all that. But after the release of A Tale of Two Stans, we were finally given a loose timeline that hints at his age, and by extension the age of his twin brother Ford and other related characters. Before this episode, all we knew was that the series took place in the summer of 2012, and that something happened on the 4th of July 30 years prior in 1982 according to this calendar in Carpet Diem. But now there's a lot more to cover, so let's just get into it. When Stan starts telling his life story, he states that it all began in 1960-something.
1960-something.
So already we're off to a bad start if we don't know what year it is. Stan and Ford look around 12, as they have sort of a similar stature to Dipper and Mabel, who are also 12, but their voices are also more high-pitched, so they could be younger. Luckily for us though, we can just ignore this part of the timeline as we have some more concrete evidence a little later, when Stan and Ford are in high school. Because during this part of the story, Ford is given an opportunity at a prestigious college, which Stan completely ruins, getting him kicked out of the house. Now since Ford is considering colleges, you could already make the conclusion that he and Stan are around 18, but we can get even more specific. Because while Stan does get kicked out of the house, in accordance with the law, that's only legal if he's over 18. So if the Stan twins are young enough to still be in high school but old enough to get kicked out of the house, that means the only age they could possibly be is 18 at this point in time. The Stans then tell of how they went their separate ways after that, up until Ford invites Stan over to his house after getting in over his head. But before Stan knocks on the door, he says,
"You haven't seen your brother in over 10 years. It's okay. He's family. He won't bite."
Which strongly hints that this is 10 years after the science fair incident. And by hint, I of course mean flat out say. But Stan doesn't just say 10 years, he says over 10 years. So what does that mean? 11 years? 20 years? 10 years in 1 month? Well, I think if it had been 11 or more years, Stan would have just said over 11 or more years. So I think our initial assumption about it being only 10 years is still correct, and the over probably just refers to the additional months that have passed since the incident. Remember, the science fair incident happened while Ford was being recommended colleges, placing this event somewhere in late May, early June, at the end of the school year. Meanwhile, in this scene, it's snowing, making it late December or early January. So when Stan says over 10 years, he's probably referring to the 10 years and 7 months since the incident. And if we ignore any birthdays they may have had during this time, it'd be safe to say they're both about 28 at this point. Though the whole 10 years thing isn't actually all that ambiguous anyway, because Stan confirms the 10-year gap after entering the shack.
That's it? You finally want to see me after 10 years, and it's to tell me to get as far away from you as possible?
What ensues is the infamous 30 years ago incident that lands Ford trapped in who knows where for a majority of the show's history. Although rather weirdly, this scene takes place in the winter, but the calendar in Carpet Diem reads July 4th. Maybe that's when Stan stopped using this room and not when the actual incident occurred? That would definitely land this incident in January, since I doubt Stan would go through the effort of buying a new calendar for an unused room. Anyway, 30 years later, it's the summer of 2012 and Ford is back, which would make Stan and Ford about 58 years old. However, according to Journal 3, Stan's birthday is June 15th, which also makes things a little complicated because that could either mean that Stan was 18 when he got kicked out, and then turned 19 a few days or weeks later, or he was kicked out a few days after his 18th birthday, assuming school lasted past June 15th. Plus, he would have had another birthday during the show's run, since the show takes place between early June and late August, which could mean that Stan's actual age is either 59 or 60, which is odd because in Dipper and Mabel vs. the Future, Stan says he's, quote, pushing 70.
I'm pushing 70 and I still eat ice cream for dinner.
Now I know what you're thinking. So what? So he's like 10 years younger than we all thought. Who cares? Well, and this may not be obvious, but this actually has huge ramifications for many other characters in the show, because it's not actually Stan's age that I'm worried about. It's Shermie's. You see, Dipper and Mabel aren't the grandchildren of Stan or Ford. They're the grandchildren of the Stan twins' younger brother, Shermie.
They're your family, Poindexter. Shermie's grandkids.
The issue is that when Stan and Ford were around 18, Shermie appeared to be only a baby. Yeah, like 1 year old when Stan and Ford were 18 years old. Which means that if Stan and Ford are 60 at best, that would make Shermie around 43. 43 years old. Grandfather of two 12-year-old kids. See what I'm getting at here? If Dipper and Mabel were just born, that would make Shermie 31. About the age when most people become a father, let alone a grandfather. Which means that the only way for this to work, timeline-wise, would be if Dipper, Mabel, and Shermie's son, yes, it's most likely that Shermie is male and had a son because they kept the Pines family name, were all the results of teen pregnancies. Yeah, not really the kind of thing you'd want to be implying in your kids' show.
Extremely fiction.
We actually don't know that much about Dipper and Mabel's parents, Shermie, or its potential wife, so this theory is entirely plausible. What's more, that line about pushing 70 by Stan came out after A Tale of Two Stans was released. Likely is damage control, since making Stan, and by extension Shermie, 10 years older would solve this issue rather smoothly, as making Shermie 53 would allow for just large enough of a time frame for him to have a kid at 20, then have that kid grow up and have their own children at 20, resulting in Dipper and Mabel, who turned 13 at the end of the series. Though if they felt the need to add this in a later episode in an attempt to retcon A Tale of Two Stans' timeline, why not just change the original episode? It would be such an easy fix, too. Just have Stan say the story starts in 1950-something, and then have him say that he hasn't seen his brother in 20 years before meeting him at the shack. Or maybe doing that would just complicate the timeline even further. Oh yeah, and this revelation about Stan's age means that Old Man McGucket is also around 60, since Ford said he was an old college buddy. Dang, who would have guessed that Old Man McGucket was so young? But then again, according to McGucket's memories, he started looking like that after around 2 years or so. Why is no one talking about this? This seems like kind of a big deal if I'm being honest. Hold on, let's see. Were Dipper and Mabel teen pregnancy? On second thought, I probably shouldn't look that up. I mean, I'm certainly not the first one to notice this, but the revelations about Stan's age are still too huge to ignore. So what's the takeaway here? Did the Gravity Falls team just make a mistake? Psh, don't be ridiculous. The Gravity Falls team doesn't make mistakes. Obviously, there's a deeper lore explanation here that none of us are seeing. Wait, yes of course. How could I be so blind? Shermie, the timeline inconsistencies, the age, there's only one explanation, people. Shermie's a Time Lord.
Look, I'm not gonna...
Do it!
I'm Stan and I was wrong. I'm singing the Stan wrong song. I shouldn't have taken that chance. Now here's my remorseful dance.
Do the kicks! Jazzier!
Hey, give me that!